Yeah, know what I was going to say, and I asked Shalane, and she said, oh yeah, they want you to share your story of why you started Unique. And at first I thought, well, that'll be easy, because I've done that actually many times. But then I thought, oh my goodness, I've never done that in front of a group this large. So if you can bear, yeah, because there's only one way to tell this story, and I have to get very personal, kind of spiritual too. But it's the only way that this could have happened, that a guy like me could have started a company like this. You know, I think we all kind of at times carry some of those insecurities from our childhood, don't we?
Yeah.
And for me, I had two big ones. One, that I was a stutterer. Was born a stutterer just like my dad. And it dominated almost everything that I did and said and how I went about my life. And the second is that we didn't have very much money. And I was very keenly aware of that. And so with those two things always dominating my thoughts, I felt very restricted in what I could be when I grew up, right? Certainly did not think I would be standing in front of a group like this. But you know, fast forward, and somehow I talked Shalane into marrying me, which was not because I had any social skills. I will assure you of that, which there's some stories that I don't have time for right now. But soon after we got married, I started to get really sick. And she was staying with my parents, and I went to a hospital which was back in Utah, and I was only going to be gone for 3 days. 3 days. And I got to the hospital, and they checked me in on the first floor in those rooms where there's a curtain between patients, and then they came back and got me in. The nurse brought me up to the 5th floor, and she brought me into this private suite in this big room. And I said, wow, thank you for the upgrade. And she said, oh yeah, people with your type of leukemia always have their own rooms. And I said, no, I'm not here for that. I'm just here for a 3-day treatment. She said, oh yeah, I can see here. And she asked me for my date of birth and my name. And I said, yeah, but I don't have leukemia. And she said, and then I saw it kind of register. She said, oh, you just got here today, did you? Yeah, I'll be right back. And I sat in the room waiting for about a half an hour, and finally there was this team of doctors that came in, and they looked like they were really serious. And so then I started to get kind of concerned. And they did actually confirm that I had leukemia and that they wanted to start chemotherapy that following day. And so obviously that, from that point on, that changed my life, right? And it changed what I was motivated by. Then it was just a struggle for my life. And I lived in that hospital for the next 4 months and 1 day. And I formed I formed bonds and friendships like you only can when you're going through something like that. One of them, his name was Greg Johnston. He came in about a month after I did. He was my same age. He had the same type of leukemia, except he was in a much worse state. And he said, Derek, I just like to get drunk and fight. And I said, Greg, you're not going to be doing either of those here in the hospital. And it seemed that everything went well for my treatments. It did not go well for him. And he spent a lot of time down in the ICU, and each time that he would come back up to the floor, I would be so excited for my friend to be back. And the nurses thought it was very, very interesting, because this happened to be during football season, and they would track all of our calories for the week, and we would eat 500 calories for the whole week, and then it was Monday Night Football. And we would eat Taco Bell, and Mentos, and chips and salsa, and consume like 2,000 calories all in one meal. But we became friends like you only can when you're going through something like that together. And Greg would share with me some of the regrets of his life. And he would tell me, Derek, I can tell that my treatments are not going to end well, but yours are. And I want you to always remember this bond that we have, and I want you to do something special. And immediately the thought that I would have was, well, that's not going to work out for me. Because my speech actually dominated everything that I thought and did. And and what I thought was possible for my life. Time passed, of course, and I finally got to the point where I was able to go home. That was one of the most glorious times in my life. There's certain things in life that you can only truly appreciate when you've had to go without them, right? And so for me, it was some of the simple pleasures after spending so much time in a hospital, getting so sick where I lost 35 pounds in just the first couple weeks. And so to come home and to be with Shalane and to experience a pizza again and to feel the wind in my face and just some of those simple pleasures. And I was always thinking about my friends back in the hospital and especially Greg. And it creates a bit of guilt as I'm experiencing those things and feeling so good and knowing that he's back there suffering still. And so I went back to the hospital for my first checkup, and that's always a whole lot of fun, right, when you go back. And I walked in for the checkup, and my body broke out in hives. And I said, "Dr. Glenn, what in the world is happening to me?" And she said, "Oh yeah, I think that's just your body saying that it doesn't want to be back here." And there is an interesting phenomenon for those of us that have gone through chemotherapy. I can go back to that hospital, to that floor, and the memories are more tied to some of the other senses too. I can close my eyes and I can just hear the jingle of the food cart and I can feel kind of nauseous. I can smell the smells and it brings back so many memories. And so to be back in that hospital after just a month brought back some of those memories, but it also made me think about Greg, and I went to find him. And he was in the ICU. He was at the very end. And I knew that it was the end because his parents were there. And I got into the smocks and I put on all the things that I had to put on for me to go into where he was. And I got down by his bed and I said, "Greg, can you please come back up to the floor one more time?" I was feeling guilty. I wanted him to come back up there for me, actually, more than him. And he grabbed my hand back and he said, "Derek, it's okay. It is okay. But you have to promise me that you will do something great for us both." And he asked me to find also for him his daughter, who he had a lot of regrets about what had happened. And I said, I promise I will find her, and I promise I will try. Greg, I will try to do something for us. And that was the last time that I saw him. And when somebody gets that sick, it's at times almost feels like a merciful thing when they do pass away. And I was motivated by the promise that I had made to him, but I was also feeling guilty because I was holding myself back. So I became a computer programmer. Because I found out later that that's what most of us stutterers do, right? It's just you and the computer, just me and the code. So I could put on the headphones and I could listen to Enya write code all day long. And we had a daughter, and my life was going great. And I would often think about the promise that I had made, but then try not to really think about it, because it actually made me feel bad that I wasn't doing what I had promised to him. And it was a few years later, I was going about my life, and we moved back to Utah, and I moved to Salt Lake, and I got a job there in part because I like to play basketball. They brought it up during the interview process, actually more than other questions. They had a team for this company. And so I got the job, and we practiced every day for 2 hours. We would go play. And it was during one of those that I know that God and Greg found a way to help me come back to where I should be. And I was playing basketball one day, and I was trying to guard the guy who was my boss. And he got me to jump up in the air, and I came down, and my head landed right on the top of his head. And I felt kind of stunned, but I was checking on him, and he turned and his eyes got huge, and he had a couple guys grab me, and they put me into a human straitjacket and lowered me to the ground. I said, "Guys, tell me what is the matter?" And they said, "Don't move, you broke your eye socket. And I said, excuse me? No, you broke your eye socket, Derek, don't move. And I went to feel my face. And of course, you know that feeling when you go to take a step and it's not there, right? So I went to feel my face and I had that same sensation because my face wasn't there, and I went back like another 2 or 3 inches. So I did it 3 times. I went to, and I said, guys, what happened? It's all right, we told you, you broke your eye socket, we called an ambulance, don't worry. And I got up and I got all of them off me because I was thinking about the cost of that. I said, no. You, Dennis, you're gonna drive me to the hospital. And he's like, okay. And he didn't want to really stand very close to me, so as I walked out of the gym, he was kind of far behind me, just kind of walking like this, and I knew that it was bad when I saw the reaction of the women that were on the cardio machines. Their expressions told me everything that I needed to know, that I was hideous, and that, because actually what had happened is the bones around my eye had broken and fallen down, but the sinus cavity right here, of course, that's a shelf of bones that's hollow behind there. And so when those shattered, it was hollow. So it looked like this huge chunk it just had been taken out of my face. And I got into Dennis's car, and I pulled down the mirror, and I saw myself for the first time. And then it hurt really bad. As I saw, and I said, oh, and he said, I told you. And I said, Dennis, get there fast, please. And he's driving. And just like a typical man, he got me up to the hospital, pulled it up to the curb. Okay, so you good then? And I walked into the emergency room all by myself. And there was one guy in there with his arm in a sling right up on the front row. I walked by him and he looked at me like that, and I walked up to the counter and the lady said, please sign in, put your name. Oh. And she patted her chest, she goes, just a second. And she ran around behind the wall and I heard her say, doctor, come out here. There's a man, he looks like he got hit in the face with a hammer. And the doctor said, we'll check him in. And she said, no, please, come out here. And I saw the doctor put his head around the wall, and even his eyes flinched for just a second. And he goes, well, that's fine, get him checked in. And so she did. She took me through the whole thing, asked for my insurance information. She couldn't abide to actually make eye contact with me. She was looking down. Finally, she got me in. And they got me back on the gurney and they hooked me up to morphine. You had that before? Uh-huh. Push the button. It's nice. But it only works every 10 minutes, right? I didn't know that. Kept pushing it. It's not working anymore. But they were giving me lots of attention until 2 skiing accidents, people who were dying, came in. So I sat there for 4.5 hours waiting to be seen. I kept pushing the nurse button, and they came in and said, Mr. Maxfield, we know you are hurting, these people are dying. And then finally I said, how do you know I'm not dying? I was thinking about everything that could be happening, because by then I'd feel my face, and it was way out here. It was a big, swollen mess. Finally, the doctor came in, took me back. They did some kind of scan, of course, and he came in, and this is exactly what he said. Oh, wait, I left out a detail. I always forget this part. Thank you, Shalane. Back before they actually took me back, I turned around, and that guy with his arm in a sling said, you can go ahead of me. That's how I got back first. But anyway, he came in, and this is exactly what he said. He said, well, you broke your face, but it's purely cosmetic. There's way too much swelling, but we do have a doctor right here on staff who can fix it for you. But there's far too much swelling now, so come back on Wednesday. So, of course, this was Friday. I walked out the same way that I walked in. I went home and I went to church on Sunday. And I walked in and I always had this joke with my wife, Shalane, that I wanted to get a black eye. And she would always be like, Derek, you're never going to get in a fight. You're not going to get a black eye. And I walked in, huh? And she said, that's a black face. And there was purple and yellow streaks. It was a thing of beauty. It was very nice. So I went back for my surgery, drove myself, walked in there, and the doctor said, well, as you know, this is a student hospital, so should we need to get access to the area, can a student help with the incision? And I said, yes, absolutely, because I had so much respect for these students after the months that I had lived there. And I said, but what do you mean, open me up? And he said, well, your damage appears to be fairly extensive, so we're going to try to go in with some instruments, but if we can't, then we're going to have to pull your face back.
Oh my God.
And he explained how they did that. Yes, that was my thought too. Oh. And he said, but don't worry, we're going to cut in like a zigzag pattern so you won't have a calic. Yes, that's how I feel. Yes, I was supposed to be grateful for that. Oh, thank you. Don't get a calic. So, I mean, how did you do? I don't have a calic, right? But I do have this scar from ear to ear. So they cut me from ear to ear and peeled my whole face off. I'll spare you some of the details that I'm told make people kind of queasy. But they inserted a whole bunch of titanium. So my face is now full of titanium right here. I have 7 plates and about 28 screws. They actually ran out of the little special screws during the surgery, so they had to keep me under for 5.5 hours while they went and got some more screws. That's true. That's true. But the story is sort of coming to a punchline here, because this surgery was performed at the same hospital where I had all my treatments all those years prior. But never during my 4 months that I lived there had I seen them put a post-op patient into our little special part of the hospital. There was 12 rooms that were the cancer treatment place. And after this surgery, for my recovery, they put me into Greg's room.
Oh my God.
The room where I had gone and seen all those football games with him, and the room where I had bonded with him. And the room where we had had so many of those heart-to-heart discussions. And so as I was coming out of the anesthesia, I knew exactly where I was. Well before I could open my eyes, or I was really aware of my surroundings, I knew where I was, but I couldn't figure out how I was back there. And then I remembered and I grabbed hold of the thought that I had a daughter then, and I thought, I have a daughter now. I didn't have a daughter when I was going through chemotherapy. Something's different. And then I remembered what had happened. And then for me, the moment that gave me the courage to change a lot of things about my attitude on my own weaknesses, and that is the thought that came to me very strongly. Exactly, Derek. You're right back here in the same place. The same place where you made promises and commitments to do something great, and yet you're using the same excuses to hold yourself back. You're using the fact that you have a stutter to prevent you from doing something that I have asked you to do. And I knew then that I couldn't do that anymore. I didn't care if I stuttered in front of the whole world. I was going to try. And the way that I held myself accountable from that day forward is I got up in the morning and I wrote in my journal. And I would write about what's the progress that I had made towards that goal, right? And I started working on software before I left for work, and I would work on it at night after the kids were in bed. And it was just 2 years later that I started a software business that became the business that changed my family's life forever. And I wanted that to be the thing that could be great, the thing that I had promised Greg. I sold that business in 2010. And I knew that while that business had been very successful and it had changed our family's finances, it hadn't really done something great. And I was driving home, this was around March of 2012, when I was talking to my wife, Shalane, and we were talking about how it's so unfair that there's women today who carry a shame and a burden for something that they didn't do when they were abused by somebody else, and yet they carry guilt and shame. And I said, Shalane, that's not fair. That's not fair. And I said, somebody needs to do something about that. And I can still remember it was on speaker in my car, and I had this overwhelming feeling that exactly this is it. Somebody needs to do something about that. Somebody needs to be a voice and a champion for a cause that somehow is taboo to talk about. Somehow it's not okay for these women to talk about it as though they had been abused by so many other forms that the world would be sympathetic and would talk about. And so when we say that the Unique Foundation is the reason why we started Unique, that's the story, that's the story. And it wasn't until then that I started to think about what the business model could be, and it wasn't until then until I talked to my sister Melanie and I said, so what can we sell? And I'm so glad that we came upon the products that we did, because I think they're an important part of the mission, don't you? Yeah. Right? But they are all that we do is to those words: uplift, empower, and validate. All of you that are here today, you mean a lot to us. I may not know all of you personally, but I draw strength from the fact that across the ocean there's an army of women who are carrying out that same mission for us. I am so grateful for what you do. So grateful. The day that we were traveling here to the UK to meet with 1,000 of you, there were 10 women back in Utah that were experiencing a retreat. Because of the success of this business, it is funded and it will continue to fund, and we will put our last dollar to that cause for as long as it takes. I want to thank all of you. I will stay here as long as you would like me to tonight, because I want to meet as many of you as I can. Thank you so much.